Greetings everybody, welcome back to this playlist where we are learning how to use TanStack Query inside of a React application. This is episode number 4. I hope you've already watched the previous episodes. If that's not the case, please make sure you watch them, because in this episode we're going to take things one step further. Things will start to get, more advanced. We're going to see more scenarios. We're going to see more features from TanStack Query and how they can help us to achieve the different, business requirements that we usually encounter in developing web applications. In this episode, I am talking about using the enabled, property that we can set for different scenarios, and we are going to talk about fetching related data. So these are the two main concepts that we're going to cover in this episode, and I'm going to show you exactly how to implement them inside of the application that we've got. So inside of my application, I'm on this branch, end of episode 4. Again, don't forget, you can get the code from the link in the description. That can of course help you to learn these concepts better, because you can clone the repository, and of course you can run the application on your machine. So let's get to this, right? Episode number 4, fetching related data with enabled, and also a couple of other scenarios that we will discuss. Again, here we are going to talk about the posts, the page that is showing like the different posts that the backend API provides. If you remember, for each post we had one category ID that kind of referred back to a category inside of the application. Let me show you what I mean. I mean here, right, if I navigate to episode 3, I guess, right, and if I show you the application, and if I go to posts, you see that for each post we have category ID. So category 1, category 2, and the backend API provides 2 categories. What I want to do for the posts page is to get the name of the category instead of the category ID. I think for the first post we've got front-end development, the second one is back-end development. And this is, because from the back-end API, when you fetch posts, for each post you've got your ID, your category ID, you don't have the category name, right? And then you've got your title and author. And when you take a look at the category ID, categories, you will see that you've got category ID as well as the name of a category. Now in my code, if I navigate to branch 4, if I go to the application, you see that right now I am fetching the name of the category. So this could be like the combination of 2 resources, categories as well as posts. This is more user-friendly, right? Because the user would like to see the name of the category, which is more descriptive than the ID of a category. And we will see in this episode how we have accomplished this using a technique for fetching related data, because this is a scenario where 2 pieces of data are related. One post is related to a category through that category ID field. So let me show you how we can achieve this. Let's go to the notes. So first we need to fetch the categories. Let's create a new query for this in our posts page, right? So here, if I go to episode 4, inside of our posts page, we previously had this query, right? If you remember, we used to fetch all of the posts. We used to expand the author, because the author was like a nested object inside of the post. In the first episode, I showed you that for each post I have implemented 2 things. For authors, I have decided to go with a nested object, but for categories, I have decided to go with a category ID field that takes me back to that specific category. So these 2 different, types of relating objects with posts, authors, and categories would allow us to better see the different techniques that we can use in order to fetch related data. When we've got a nested object, we can simply use expand, and expand using that backend API that we've got can get us the authors for each post. But for categories, it's not that simple. For categories, we've got a category ID inside of each post, and that category ID takes us back to the category the category of that post. First off, we need to fetch all categories. This is another, query function that I have created. Again, using fetch, I am communicating with my backend API with this endpoint, and I am getting all of the categories. You are already familiar with this. This is not something, fancy. This is something we have been doing over the past like 3 episodes. This is the first step. So the first step, the first step is to create a query function for fetching all of the categories that our backend API provides, right? So what is the next step? Let's take a look at the explanation as well as the code that I've got here. So first, we're using use query, right, to fetch all of the categories, right, using the query key categories. Then we are updating the loading and error handling to account for both posts and categories. We've got this function, get category title, which takes the category ID and returns the corresponding category title by searching through the fetch categories data. And in the table, we use get category title to, show the category of each category ID. Let's take a look here. So here, using this, so if you again take a look here, you see that we've got this, category. We are fetching all of the categories, right, from the backend API. And then we've got this posts page. So this is the component, and this is the function that we have for our component. We are using the use query hook. We are capturing is loading data and error. But as you can see, I am coming with different names for this. Why? Because I have another similar query this time for categories, right? So because I want to be able to refer to these loading, error, and data for categories and for posts, I have decided to come up with different names for them. And of course, they have different, keys as well. They have references to different functions as well. Basically, what I have decided to do then in this component is that I am fetching not only posts, right? Every single post with authors, but also every single categories. There are no ID coming into the component. Now, let's take a look at this section. Previously, we used to only check one of the loading flags, but here we are checking both of them, categories and posts. If either one of them returns false, because these flags return true or false, I am going to say loading posts or categories. If these return true, it means that they're being loaded. If posts error is true, I'm going to say that we encountered some problem when fetching posts, or we encountered some problem when fetching categories. Now, this item, this function is new and it is very important. Let's see what is happening here. Remember, here inside of the posts and categories, when everything goes smoothly without any errors, we will have all of the posts with all of the authors embedded into them, nested into them, and of course we will have a category ID. And here also we will have a category ID and the name of a category. Now we want to link them here. Let's see what we are doing here in this get category title. So we are getting a category ID, and then we are inside of that array, which is like the result of that fetch. We are putting in the category ID, and we are fetching one category from our local array. And if we've got a title for that category, we're going to return it. Otherwise, we're going to say that category doesn't exist, or it's an unknown category. So if the ID associated, if the category ID associated with a post cannot be found inside of this categories array, we're going to say unknown category. Otherwise, we're going to fetch the title of that category. So this is the way we are printing out the name of the category, not the ID. And of course, here again, as you take a look, we are printing not only the post ID, but also using that function, we are passing in the category ID associated with a post, and that function returns the name of that category as we just saw. We're returning the post title author name. This is the nested object inside of the post, and then we've got this link component which navigates us to see the details of each category. If I click here, you see the different pieces of information for that category. So basically the technique here is that we are using two different queries, and using two different queries we're fetching posts, categories, and then inside of the component with a helper function we are printing the name or the title of a category rather than the category ID. So that is the thing we are doing here. Now we're not finished yet. We want to talk about using enable for conditional fetching. In our current scenario, we're fetching all categories as I showed you up front, right? However, there might be cases where you only want to fetch related data if a certain condition is met. The enabled option in use query allows you to conditionally enable or disable a query. So as you can see, little by little, we are seeing different features of the use query. One of them is enabled, right? So use query, right now, we have seen the query key and query function a couple of times. But here we are going to talk about enabled. And enabled helps us to set an option in the use query hook that allows us to conditionally enable or disable a query. So right now we are not using that enabled inside of this use query, and as I showed you, we are fetching every category up front. Chances are we want to enable or disable a query based on a condition, based on a certain condition, and the enable flag, enabled option can help us do that. So the enabled option accepts a Boolean value or a reactive value like a state. If enabled is false, the query will not run automatically. Right now, the enabled is true because the query runs automatically. It will only run if enabled becomes true and the query is not already in a successful or error state with fresh data. So you can control whether the query is enabled or not using this option, and if you set this option to true, it means that the query will run automatically. If that query is not already in a successful or error state with fresh data. I have prepared an example for this. Let me show you what I mean. Take a look here. This posts by category page, right? And I have added a route here. So I've got this route, right, for this component without any route parameters, and I am going to show you what I have done here. Let's take a look. I've got this, so let's talk about what I've done here, right? This is another component. I created this component because I wanted to show you how you can, use the enabled flag, as you can see here, to conditionally enable or disable a query. Let's see what is happening here. The name of the component is posts by category page, and I can show you what it is doing. So if I navigate to posts with categories, you will see that I will get the different categories, right? And when I click on each category, I will see the posts inside of that category. Again, this is a very, let's say, common requirement that you will probably want to implement inside of your applications, and use query and TanStack Query has you covered. Now let's see how I have achieved this. Take a look at this. This is very similar to what we had already done inside of that post detail post page with categories. We are basically passing in the category ID to this fetch function, and we are getting the posts associated with a specific category ID. So not all posts, but a post whose category ID matches this category ID. Again, to refresh our memories, we know that from the backend API, we've got some posts. For each post, we've got a category ID, and that category ID kind of connects a post with a category item, and a category item has an ID and a name. So again, we are fetching, right? We are fetching a post whose category ID equals the category ID that we are receiving inside of this function. And if everything goes according to the plan, we're going to return response.json and so on. Now the component. Post by category page. First, I have created this state. It is called selected category ID. And at first, I have set it to an empty string. As the name suggests, it will capture the ID of a category that has been selected inside of that dropdown that I showed you. And then I've got this query. This query, let's see what it is doing. So it is using this fetch posts by category, this function that we talked about here, right? And then it is passing in, because this function requires a category ID. And the thing that we are passing here is the selected category ID that we declared here, the state, the local state of the component. And this is the important part. This query is not going to be enabled from the very beginning. I mean, when we run the application, when we see the component, this query will not get executed. When will it get executed? When we have a category ID set to this state. And when does that happen? You will see when the user selects a category ID from that component, from that drop-down. So when the user selects a category ID from that drop-down, this will get some state, this will get some data. Right now it is an empty string. And when this gets some data, this enabled will become true. And when this enabled becomes true, this query will get executed. And this query will execute this, right? And this will return like the posts inside of a category. You see the query key has also been set. The query key has also been set. We've got the posts because the query key is an array, so you can put multiple items inside of it. So we've got posts and we've got the selected category ID as an object. And the query function, I told you about the query function. We're going to not only pass the selected category ID, but we're going to enable or disable the query based on the value inside of this state, which is initially set to an empty string. So let's continue talking about the template. So we've got our posts by category section. We've got this dropdown, this select. The value of this dropdown is being, set using that state that we have, the local state, selected category ID. And whenever the unchanged triggers, we are going to call this function. And this function, what it is doing is that it is picking up the selected value inside of this drop down or select element, and it's going to set the value of that local state to the selected value, right? So first off, as you can see, I have hard-coded the different category IDs that I've got. So of course I could skip hard coding these, and I could fetch these as well, but I have decided to hard code these. So I've got three options. The values are 1 for this post, this category, let's say. I've got 2 for this category. These are hard coded, and whenever the user selects one of these, this function will get executed, and this function is responsible for setting the selected value, number 1 or number 2, inside of the state. The state was called selected category ID. And when this state, which is initially set to an empty string, when this gets a value, either number 1 or number 2, it means that this query will get executed, because the enabled option of this query is checking whether this state has some value or not. And when this gets executed, you see you already know what will happen. You will get all of the posts associated with this category ID from your database, from your backend API. And then this part, I think it's easy. We're checking is loading. This is also another way to check whether is loading, is it still true or not. So if it is loading, we're going to say loading posts. If there is an error, we're going to say we encountered some error. Otherwise, we're going to render a data. We're going to render a UL, and for each piece of data, for each, let's say, post that we've got inside of the data, we are going to render the post title and the post ID. So this is the data that we've got, right? So here you see the data. the data for this hook, for this single instance of the use query, is going to be the different posts associated with a category here. So when we are mapping over the data, it means the posts that are associated with that selected category. And for each one, we're rendering the title as well as the ID. And here, if there is no value inside of that state, and if is loading is true, it's false. I mean, we have loaded everything successfully, and if the length of the data is, null, it means there is no posts associated with this selected category. We're going to say, you know what, we already did the query, everything went according to the plan, but unfortunately there are no posts here. So this is another good scenario of seeing how to fetch related data, this time using the enabled flag, the enabled option for controlling whether a query is enabled or disabled. So as you can see here, these are the hard-coded categories, right? When I run the application, there is no value inside of that category ID state, selected category ID, but whenever I click one of these, the unchanged event of this select element will get executed. There will be a value inside of that selected category ID, and I will see every single post inside of that category associated with that category. And this is the way to achieve this. If I take you to the notes, everything I talked about can already be found inside of the note. And there are also some other, options that you can, some other, scenarios that you can cover using the enabled category, the enabled option here, right? So you can pause the video here and study these as well. And this is another example of this. So in this episode, we talked about getting related data using two scenarios. One of them was to loading everything up front. Here we had posts page. We had two different, queries. This was the first scenario we talked about. The second scenario was to control the, execution of a query using enabled. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this video till the very end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and stay tuned for the next episode.